Most of the 1,300 people who were arrested were black. Most of the dead and injured were black. 17 blacks were reported killed by the police. After the riot, the NAACP collected affidavits which charged that the police had stood aside and let the white rioters have their way. Gloucester Current was head of the Detroit chapter.
In Detroit at the time, the police and the black community had no love for each other. So it was not difficult for the police to forget their sworn duty. And at times, and in some instances, as the affidavits will show, they became almost a part of the mob itself. They did not provide the protection that isolated blacks should have had on a streetcar or in the cars. There were a number of cars that were burned and with police standing around.
And it just kept getting bad and getting worse. And finally, the regular army was brought in, and they came in with big tanks and with big trucks with guns mounted on them. And I remember that they were tall, lanky, long, red-whiskered Texans, and they were not there to fool around. They let me at them.
They were all over the city. They were constantly riding. You'd see one pass you every so often. Any incident out of ordinary, they would investigate it, and they kept the police in line. They were on strict orders from the governor to keep order and restore order, and they did. So it was a godsend. If that hadn't happened, we could talk about real bloodshed.
The final toll was 25 blacks and 9 whites killed, more than 700 people wounded or injured. Property damage was put at $2 million. The rioting essentially was over in 24 hours, but it planted lasting questions in the minds of thoughtful men.
You just got a feeling that, what place do I have? Where am I? Who am I? And you had always been taught, I'd been in church all my life, that God was a fair God, just God. But I thought maybe he'd just gone to sleep. And while he's asleep, all this is happening, because he was the fair God that I'd been taught he was. He wouldn't let one segment of the population misuse the other as we were being misused. Now, that came out of it to me.
Blacks and whites could bear arms in a common cause and work together in war plants. But when old hatreds bubbled up, that unity of purpose was blown apart. Come back to the summer of '43, to the power of this country's industrial machine and the shameful exclusion of Japanese Americans.
Our World continues in a moment.
Welcome back to Our World. It is summer 1943. We're fighting 2 wars, over there and back here, the home front. There's a tendency to look with nostalgia on that summer. We were so together as a nation. We were bound by a common enemy. But the war that forced that togetherness only emphasized the apartness of a country that divided itself along racial, sexual, and economic lines. We were supposed to be something more. We said we were.
We had to make do with less that summer, but we had more to make do with. Almost anybody who could work did work. There was virtually no unemployment. Wages were at an all-time high, and there was plenty of overtime. Defense contracts were handed out on a cost-plus basis, the government guaranteeing the company's costs plus a handsome profit. The home front was humming.
I can say to you that we are getting ahead of our enemies in the battle of production.
We did it before, and we can do it again, and we will do it again. We'll knock them over, and then we'll get the guy in back of them. We did it before, we'll do it again.
In the summer of '43, 2/3 of all American industrial production was war production. 9 million people, 4 million of them workers, uprooted themselves and came together in the war plants. Humming around the clock, Henry J. Kaiser's shipyard in Richmond, California, turned out a new Liberty ship every 12 days. In 1943, more than 1,200 Liberty ships were built, faster than the enemy could sink them, and almost faster than we could pay for them. Uncle Sam needed ready money, and Donald Duck volunteered.
Are you a patriotic American? Eager to do your part? Then there's something important you can do. You won't get a medal for doing it. It may mean a sacrifice on your part. But it will be a vital help to your country in this hour of need. Shall I tell you what it is? Shall I? Your income tax. Yes, your income tax.
Your income tax, which had been paid in a lump sum once a year, was now withheld by your employer from every paycheck.
When they gave her a production knee, she was as proud as a girl could be. There's something true about red, white, and blue, about Rosie the Riveter.
America's women came to the aid of their country by going to work, millions of them. In 1943, they made up 1/3 of the workforce. War plants actively recruited women. And no, the pay wasn't equal, and no, it didn't last. But yes, it was a beginning, a big one. Janet Doyle worked at the Kaiser Shipyard in Richmond, California.
I feel that that was the beginning of women's liberation movement. Maybe they didn't realize it at the time, but it was. Because we showed that we could do a man's job, and that there weren't that many differences. I know how the men felt. Here were all these young girls and women trying to do the same things they were doing. They really resented us invading their territory.
One company advertised if you can drive a car, you can run a machine. So they ran machines and welded, were ship fitters, electricians, boilermakers. They learned.
The first big adjustment for me was getting over my fear of electricity. I had to learn to weld overhead and have all these shower of molten metal go down into your collar. Even though you were wearing a leather jacket, snapped and everything, it would still get in there. And also you wore leather gauntlets, but the sparks, little tiny pieces of molten metal down into your arms. So I had to get used to that.
They got used to that, and then they got some pride. Vivian Ranieri.
We were really good, you know. We were good at what we did. We felt good about what we were doing, and we felt this special togetherness. And I remember how jaunty and proud and cute, even, I felt in my shipyard workers' clothes. And there was a special feeling, I think, among the women that we were part of this wonderful effort of building a ship, a beautiful ship, a raw hulk that became transformed into this beautiful, shining ship that then we would see go off the ways. It was a wonderful experience.
Try to see it as it was then. Try to see it as the opportunity it was for women. An opportunity that had not been offered to another group of American outsiders. On the West Coast, nearly 120,000 Japanese Americans were considered to be a security risk. They were stripped of their land, their possessions. They were moved inland to remote detention centers. Let's call these for what they were, prisoner of war camps. It was a disgraceful episode in American history, but in 1943, the quiet dignity of these people received attention from an unexpected source.
The landscape photographer Ansel Adams took his camera that summer to Manzanar, an internment camp in the desolate California desert. The result, a tribute to the Japanese Americans' courage and grace under stress. They certainly didn't resemble those twisted, evil creatures on the propaganda posters or the little yellow bellies who met the Cohens and the Kellys in one of the songs of the day. Wartime is no time for making fine distinctions. Loyal Americans were treated as enemies. One of them, Robert Motecki, was 10 years old that summer.
Worst of all, I think it was an emotional imprisonment that, even now as I think about it, digs up old scars. But I was 10. I remember the barracks were hot, dusty. Each family had a room, the barracks kind of furniture. There was little privacy. Bathing was communal.